Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Computomics podcast. Our guest today is the VP of Innovation at the International Fresh Produce Association, Vonnie Estes. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to talk to you.
I'm very excited to have you here with us. Vonnie, you already know we start out of left field here. So I was curious, as someone who does a podcast herself, which podcast do you like to listen to in your free time and why?
Oh, that's a great question. So it's probably not a podcast that many of your listeners are aware of, but it's the name of the podcast is called Pivot, and it has a business and tech journalist, and then is one of the hosts, and then the other host is he's started a lot of startup companies, and he actually went to business school here in California with a huge number of my friends, but is now very successful. And they just talk a lot about technology and how it's affecting business worldwide. And they pick on people like Elon Musk, which is always, interesting to listen to. And this is a very interesting, interactive podcast, but not to everyone's taste.
Well, that's always the case with podcasts. But I love those kind of recommendations because very often, especially with someone like you have a very diverse background, many experiences. It's interesting to see kind of, what else do you listen to? And I'm sure some of our audience will find that exciting to explore. We'll put it in the show notes. Vonnie, you at IFPA, your role is to bring technology to the produce industry across the supply chain, right?
Mm-hmm.
What would you say are the most pressing needs or critical challenges that the produce industry is facing at the moment?
Oh, so many. And
let's start at the top.
Yeah. Well, let's start at the beginning. I know you've had several guests on talking about breeding, and a lot of what people are breeding for in the produce industry is, we're trying to breed for a lot around climate change. How can crops be more drought resistant? How can they just weather, all these different changes in the weather right now? And it gets hot for longer, and, in some places not cold long enough, or, some trees and berries need chilling time, and we're not getting that because of climate change. So a lot of what we're doing in breeding is trying to come up with those types of solutions. And then moving down, also once the crop is growing, insect and pest diseases are really changing because of weather. And so trying to be able to predict for that, have products that take care of that. And then moving into post-harvest and the supply chain is an area that we're really looking at. In produce, it's very different than a lot of other agricultural crops in that it's a cold chain. So things, almost all of our produce has to be kept cold. And if that cold chain is broken, then you get a huge amount of food waste. And so we're starting to see all sorts of really great technology of being able to really track, if the cold chain gets broken and with this perishable product, then what do you do? How does that affect shelf life? So there's all these issues that we're looking at, kind of brought about by climate change, brought about by the global nature of shipping our product that's perishable. We also don't have a kill step. Most people who grow crops, there is something in the way that the crop is processed that there's high heat and it will kill any pathogens. Produce doesn't have that. So we really have to pay attention to food safety and make sure that what we're doing with that, all the way from in the field through packing, shipping, storing, logistics, and the shelf, that we don't have any pathogens. And if we do, what's the traceability of that, and how do we take care of that right away so more people don't get sick? So those are just a few of the minor things that we try to take care of.
Just a few tiny issues to deal with. Let's actually, because I think you illustrated very well the differences between many other crops and fresh produce. Let's focus on those challenges specifically. Like you said, it's about keeping them cool, cold or cool. Maybe which technologies or which developments do you see in that area when it comes to shipping, to transport, that you're excited about?
A lot of it we've had, we've had sensors for a long time, but what's being added to that is not only are we, logistics in the supply chain used to be more about, okay, just tracking the temperature. Right now, temperature is this, it's this and this and this. And so now, with machine learning and AI and just the connectivity of everything all the way through the supply chain, not only are we saying, okay, it just got below a critical temperature, this is now what that means. You're going to have the shelf life is going to be this much less. Or if you're en route to go to like a distribution center of a big grocery store or something, you should put this up front because it needs to go faster. So it's not that the crop is ruined. It's just that
Right.
you better move it along a little more quickly, or, it's not going to have as much shelf life when it gets to the store, and that upsets the store and the consumer.
So like an early warning system of a kind?
Yeah, yeah. They have, like,
Mm.
alarms,
Mhm.
like the cold chain got broke, it was interesting, just an example of supply chain for me. I worked for years more kind of in the more commodity crops, that didn't require cold chain, and
Mhm.
my first conference that I went to in produce, I went to hear a session on logistics,
Mhm.
and I had done a lot of work in breeding and, like, how do we make these crops so perfect, and what do we
Yeah.
do around breeding? And so they were talking about with logistics in the cold chain, and they said, yeah, and so this 18-year-old guy drives a truck, goes into the truck stop, takes a shower, eats dinner, forgot to leave the refrigeration unit on, and the whole truck of tomatoes is, completely ruined. And it's kind of humbling to realize that. It's like we do
Mm.
all this stuff, early in the cycle of
Yeah.
a plant, but if the guy doesn't flip on the refrigeration switch, then you lose the crop. So the supply chain is really changing right now and becoming not just kind of I'm giving you information, but there's so
Mhm.
much technology in the supply chain now that it's actually becoming kind of cognitive, where people can do a lot of prediction and really understand what's going on through the whole supply chain, which
Mhm.
also helps with transparency, like I was talking about, as far as food safety and those types of things. You can go all the way back in the history of that product and figure out, like, if there's a food safety problem, did it start in the
Mhm.
field? If it started in the field, we can find the row sometimes that
Mm.
pathogen is at. So in the past, if we had a food safety outbreak, you just took all spinach off the shelf because you
Mhm.
didn't want to take the chance. Now we can know exactly where that problem happened and go and just take care of the problem where it was, not the whole industry, and take all of the product off the shelf.
Mhm. So way more precise and I guess more adaptive to whatever the challenge may be, and there can be many with a supply chain this complex.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. So how do you go about maybe propagating these changes, or what exactly does your work look like? Take our audience with you to work, basically.
That's a great question because this is a huge issue that we're working on at IFPA right now. And we just started this initiative called Supply Chain of the Future. And so, what we're trying to do with this initiative is just bring all the industry together, bring the growers together, the packers together, the logistics companies, and the retailers, and trying to really solve this problem. Because one of the issues, as I'm sure you know, is just
Mm.
who owns the data and who gets to see the data. And people don't like their data shared across the whole supply chain. So
Mm.
that's one of the issues we're trying to come up with, and doing things like data escrows where the data's there, but not everyone gets to see all the data unless there's a problem. And
Mm.
also just looking at how it's standardization. There's not a lot of standardization, especially across borders, all different countries, even in our country, different states, have different
Mm.
requirements.
Mhm.
So we're really looking at how do we standardize so that every product has to go through the same thing. So we're working on this big project where, and if there's any of your listeners happen to be in this part of the industry, you don't have to be a member of our association. You certainly, we're trying to get companies outside of our country,
Mhm.
outside the US. So it's a global initiative. And we're just bringing a lot of people together to ask these questions and trying to figure out, around standardization and around data escrows, how do we set up the supply chain that just creates all these efficiencies? Because if everyone has the same data going all the way through, then
Mm.
the retailer, ultimately the consumer, if they care, but, can have the information about everything about that product and where it's been and how it's been treated. And it will really increase efficiency, productivity, and nutrition and taste of the product.
Mhm. And how can people participate? Because I have a suspicion that quite a few of our audience might be interested in joining this effort. Like, what does it look like? How do people take part?
So go to our website. You can just go to the freshproduce.com and then search supply chain of the future. And there's a white paper written on it. And then there's a bunch
Mhm.
of, easy to read things of like how to get involved. And right now we have a number of companies that we're piloting some of these ideas to try to figure out,
Mm.
how do we make this work? And there's committees and councils and meetings and webinars. And so there's just a wealth of information on the website. And if people don't find what they're looking for there, they can contact me and I can help guide them through it. But yeah, it's a really it's such an important initiative of right now of trying to figure out, how do we continue to improve the whole supply chain and give people great nutritious food.
We'll definitely put all that information in the show notes too, so everyone can jump on over and see how they can participate. It sounds like you've got a really great mix of initiatives that are already ongoing, pilot projects that are already ongoing, and also an openness for other voices to join and bring in their expertise, their skills for maybe new projects that might start within that initiative. Is there any pilot project that you're involved with that you'd like to share some details about?
One of the other initiatives that we're working on, and this will interest people in other countries that have more initiatives on this, is getting rid of single-use plastic. Because certainly in the US, and I know in some other countries, they're starting to move more to like fiberboard or cardboard in the stores instead of putting everything in plastic. And so we have funding from the United States Department of Agriculture to help the US industry come up with alternatives to single-use plastic for packaging and produce, so that as all these regulations change, we're still going to be able to export to other countries, because a lot of countries very smartly are saying, we're just not going to accept your single-use plastics. And so you better come up with something else. So I run an accelerator program where we're trying to find different types of materials, because as some of the things that I talked about before, like around food safety, and you've got, really soft raspberries and strawberries, you can't just put them in a paper bag and ship them. There's food safety issues, and there's, just having the product safe and whole. So I run an accelerator where we give funding to startup companies to bring us different kinds of materials. We have one company in the program that they have a plastic, it's not plastic, but they have a material that's made from algae that acts as plastic. And then we're also using fiberboard, that comes from different kinds of trees and that sort of thing. And we've got other types of materials that reduce the use of single-use plastic, so you can mix it with plastic, and so you're using less plastic. So it's a really exciting program because it's a problem that is really starting to be an issue for our industry, where we've got this product, but we have to figure out a way to ship it and take care of it and take care of people at the same time. And the reason we have so much plastic in the world is because it works really well, unfortunately. And so trying to come up with things that work as well, that do everything that plastic does, it's a big initiative to try to do that. But it's certainly something that we need to solve, not just in produce, but across all different products. We need to be using less plastic. So I'm pretty excited about that program as well.
Very, very relevant. You mentioned a grant program. How is that set up? So how can people participate or apply, rather, for that grant if they have a good idea?
The grant, we run it yearly. And so the applications usually are open this year in October, and then they close in December. And then next year we'll have the same cycle, open in October, close in December. And people, again, can go to our website and just look at all the requirements for it. But it's $50,000 to $250,000 US dollars. And then the program that I run, there's a lot of other elements of the program, of going to our show, being able to exhibit in our show, and we introduce people across the whole industry. So it's a great opportunity. One of the things I've been trying to do is, I love working with startups. It's a lot of my past, but I also like companies that have a lot of money and are already doing things. And I have one company that they already have a product that they're using in the fast food industry. And so they already can make that product. It's a really good product. And now we're just figuring out, how can we use that in produce? So it's open. The only requirement, since it is a US funded program, is that the company has to have some sort of operations in the US. They can have operations in other countries, but they have to have some operation in the US. But yeah, it's a great program. And really, this is a lot of things that, I don't know, some of your listeners may not be used to dealing with trade associations, because they're, not everyone works in their world. But what trade associations do is, the function is to do things as, we can do things as a collective group to support the whole industry that one company can't either afford to do or just doesn't have the time to focus on. So things like supply chain in the future and packaging are things that affect the whole industry, from beginning to end. And we can really focus on those things, get funding for those things, and try to solve those big problems for people.
Right. And that's the exciting thing, to be able to connect the right people either to the money or to others, and hopefully do something for the industry together. We'll make sure to put that in the show notes as well. You also have your own podcast, Fresh Takes on Tech, about technology and solutions in the produce industry, right? What maybe is something that you stumbled over or came across through the podcast that you could share with our audience as well? We do a little crossover here.
Yeah, great. So like many people, I started my podcast during the shutdown and COVID, where I just needed to talk to people. So, and I'm sure you can relate to this. There's nothing more fun than like calling someone up and having a half-hour conversation about something they're really passionate about. So I really enjoyed it. And I don't know, my podcast started really long. Like the first, I don't know, the ones during COVID were like an hour, some were like an hour and 10 minutes.
We all had time then.
Yeah, exactly. We had time to do it. We had time to listen. You could get guests, and I've now gone to this similar format as you, is about 25 minutes is what my podcasts are. So I think I've done now between 150 and 160. And I try to focus on technology that's in the produce industry and kind of a technical angle, not as much a business or a government angle. So the last season that I did over this summer was on AI. And so I just wanted, everyone's going crazy about AI and like, what's your AI strategy? What are you doing? And people in our industry just have no idea, like, what does that mean? What do I do?
Yeah.
So it was really an interesting journey for me because I talked to people that I knew, which I normally do, and people in the industry that had been, either in it or on the edges of it, and just tried to understand what effect it was having on them. And so I did 8 episodes. And it was really fascinating. And a friend of mine said when I was setting this up, he said, you're gonna have an opinion about this at the end. And it really was, a lot of times I talk to people that I know more about what they're doing. And this one on AI, I felt, I was kind of more of a tourist of, help me understand what you're doing. And so in the 8 episodes, I talked to someone who was in charge of a very large R&D corporate organization that worked on genetics and crop breeding. I talked to an investor. I talked to someone at Microsoft about how they're supporting with platforms, what other companies are doing, different people in all parts of the supply chain that touch the industry. And it was really fascinating to hear kind of where we are. And, what almost in every podcast, someone would make the comment, AI changes everything. It became like this joke. I'm like, yeah, AI does change everything, But it really did show, one of the things I got out of that is just the acceleration of the use of AI and how we're going to continue to accelerate different things in the industry. Breeding can go faster. And I was talking to an investor and he said, the companies that we're looking at are even different because now they can hire fewer people and they can just, whatever their product is, it can go faster. It can go faster to market. We don't have to support them for as long, as a venture capitalist. And so I think that was the main thing. And so little about jobs. Everyone has this, talks about and their worry about jobs. But in my conversations with people, it was just about better efficiencies. One example I loved was talking to someone at Walmart in a distribution center, and they have these huge distribution centers. I went into one and it's
like a little city, right?
US. Yeah, it was like it's a weird U.S. reference, but like on Star Trek, they have the Borg, and it was like this huge, giant spaceship where things were moving like above and beyond and beside, and there's like things, I kept looking for the Queen, but it was so huge, and you really look at a place like that and what AI can do and how they pack things. But we were walking around, and there's a whole section that's like a skyscraper that is kept at way below freezing, like sub-zero. And people were having to work in there. And like, no one wants to work in there. That's horrible, And he said, you could only have people in there for a short period of time, and they'd come out and like their mustaches would be frozen. And so now they don't have to have people working there. And so there's things like that. And in the field, the same thing, where if you've got automation and robotics in the field doing any amount of the harvesting, and sometimes in the field, it's They may still have to have people like up on the pieces of equipment putting like heads of lettuce into boxes, but they no longer have to have the person on the ground with a knife bent over all day cutting the lettuce because the machine can do that. So it's a lot about just improving jobs. And so those were the types of things of just the efficiency and how it's just, making it better for workers.
Exciting. And I feel like it's also very, very nice in a way. You also cover in your podcast and in that series, in that season, you also cover the entire supply chain when it comes to AI. So a definite recommendation for everyone to check out the podcast, which will be in our show notes as well. Vonnie, I could talk to you all day with all you're doing. Thank you so much for those insights. As a last question, maybe, is there anything you'd like our audience to check out besides your podcast that you found very helpful in your many different activities in the field?
Our website has a lot of information about the work that we're doing, and we also have a lot of newsletters about, the work that we're doing. So, if there's any particular area, we work in food safety. We work a lot in working with retailers and having retailers understand the whole supply chain. And so just anything around that area, if people are interested in finding out more information. But it's one of the things I really love about my job is being able, in a lot of companies, when you're working on one technology and you got to get that to market or you've got to solve that scientific problem and you have to be head down. Like that's what the job is.
Right.
And I've had those jobs. I've had a very long, great career, both as a scientist and a business person. But at this point in my career, to be able to work with people all the way across the whole supply chain and like connect all those dots of what makes sense and how we're going to make, better food for people, it's really exciting.
That passion comes across, being head up, connecting people, seeing everything and connecting everybody. You've definitely connected me and our audience today, Vonnie. Thank you so much. And I hope you'll be back sometime.
Thank you very much. This was a really great conversation. And thanks for the work that you do. I'm now a loyal listener to you.
Yay, we love to hear that. Thank you for listening in today. Want to learn more? Then check out our show notes and more info on Computomics.com. If you have questions or want to propose a next guest, please reach out to us at podcast@Computomics.com.